Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. G'day, podcasters. Before we get underway with True Blue Conversations, just wanted to give a huge shout out to our friend and sponsor, the Warrior U podcast, hosted by Bram Connolly. Bram is a former Special Forces commander, best-selling author, popular podcast host, and human optimization pioneer. He has an authentic style and the unique ability to not only motivate, but also take people on a journey of self-discovery. Through the Warrior U podcast, Bram interviews guests in a bid to explore all things human optimization, resilience, leadership, and coffee. His book, The Commando Way, a Special Forces Commander's Lessons for Life, Leadership and Success, is available now on amazon.com.au. So from Adam Bloom and all of us here at True Blue Conversations, a big shout out to the Warrior U podcast, Bram Connolly, and his new book, The Commando Way, out now.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today I'm joined by a really special guest, someone that I owe so much to and she's sort of been someone who I have idolised for a long, long time, and to be actually a pinch myself moment sitting across from her is amazing. And it is the one and only Amelia Adams, the TV journalist, and she currently works for 60 Minutes as a reporter, and she's just an absolute inspiration, and I just wanted to get her on to share her amazing story. So Amelia Adams, thank you so much for joining us on True Blue Conversations.
Thank you, Adam. Aren't you lovely? And thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, it's an absolute honour and a privilege. So Amelia, before we get into the glitz and glamour of TV and the TV world...
Oh, that'll be a short segment.
Let's go back to a young Amelia, and can you tell us where you grew up, what hobbies you had, and what were you like at school?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on Sydney's North Shore, and I loved sport and dancing and got into rowing in high school. I always loved writing, though. I used to write little books and record myself on a tape recorder back in the olden days, reading the news, the family news each evening. So I always had that sort of love for and interest in, things that were happening around me and storytelling and finding different ways to tell stories, even as a kid.
So for you mentioned that you always loved telling stories. Did you always know that you were going to be a journalist, or from a young age? Looking
back, I think it was probably inevitable. I always said I wanted to be a pilot because my father was a Qantas pilot and I sort of idolised him. And I even to the point of, I joined the Air Force Cadets and when I was about 12, and I really thought that would be the career path for me. But in hindsight, I think I just liked the idea of flying first class. So didn't last long in physics class at all, terrible at navigation. And really my strengths lay in English and writing and those sorts of subjects. So I pretty quickly changed course and realised that journalism was the way to go for me.
So did you, and I forgot to mention, did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have an older sister. She's nearly 3 years older than me. She's lived in Europe for the last 20 years, actually. She left Australia when she was 19, I know. But despite that, we are so close. We talk and we WhatsApp several times a day. I miss her dearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, what university did you go to when you finished high school?
So I went to Charles Sturt University. I took a year off after high school and travelled, which I highly recommend. And I was young too. I finished school quite young. So I went to Charles Sturt University in Bathurst because it was so renowned for its communication degrees and just the practical nature of them. And that turned out to be spot on for me. I think by second year uni I was 18 and I was on Radio National. I was on air for Prime, Orange, doing those sorts of internships, but just getting real practical newsroom experience, which was prioritised perhaps over theory. And I'm a big believer in journalism. You just got to learn on the job. So
for someone who is looking to get into journalism, how how's it work? Like, is it always the goal of you want to be prime time, you want to be on live on air, or how's it work? How's the progression?
I think everyone's different. Obviously, people who love writing, perhaps, want to get into print journalism. I always had an interest in broadcast journalism because you asked me earlier if I thought I would be a journalist. I did used to say to my parents from the age of about 7 or 8, 60 Minutes was the one show that I was allowed to stay up late. Yes. I think it was on at 8:30 consistently in those days, and watch on a Sunday night. And I did always say to them, I want to be on that show. So I had a specific interest in broadcast journalism and a specific obsession with 60 Minutes and the stories they told and the places they went and the way they told them. So for me, the broadcast part of that degree was really relevant, and I really enjoyed the radio experience. And then I naturally sort of went into some regional newsroom training.
So what challenges did you face early on in your career? And you mentioned that you just sort of, you got to do it and just, what challenges did you face?
Oh, so many. I mean, I still face so many challenges every day. It's a very challenging industry. It's very competitive.
Cutthroat. Yeah.
And, it's a huge privilege, but also very taxing to tell people stories. And the nature of it is, of journalism, of news journalism certainly, is that you are turning up on people's doorsteps at either the very best, but more often the very worst moment in their life. So whether that's, in my early days reporting on crime, a family who lost children in a car crash, or I remember a shark attack, which has stayed with me for my entire career, or a war zone. It's, people's greatest trials and challenges and tragedies that you're asking them to open up and share with you.
So for you, how did you deal with that side of the negative side in the early days and now, because you've been in the industry now and a long time, and I'm not bringing age into it.
20 years.
Yeah, 20 years.
It does make me feel old.
But for you...
21 years this year, my goodness.
What have you learned about yourself and how to deal with that, with the negative side, from where you were in the early days to now?
I think it's always just been stripping it back to humanity. We're all human. I think humans by their nature want to talk and want to share, whether that be tragedy and grief or whether it be their greatest triumph or quirky, extraordinary tale. So it's tapping into that. It's basically, and I don't want to, give away the smoke and mirrors, but it's talking to people, which is what we all do every day. So it's just how you communicate, how you approach people, and how you, I think the challenge for me and the thing that I still find a huge responsibility, and I still probably stress about this the most out of anything at 60 Minutes, is that responsibility of taking that information and taking other people's words and stories, and then I have to put them into my words, and doing that justice, whilst keeping in mind objectivity, accuracy, all of the things that you need to make a story.
For you, what was it? Do you remember your first live cross, and what were you nervous on that first live cross?
I remember you mentioned this, and I was racking my brains. I think my first live cross that I recall in the Sydney market, certainly I'd spent some time reporting in Queensland in my early 20s, but when I moved to Sydney, to the Channel 10 newsroom initially, I was sent to, it must have been 2009, and I was sent to stand outside the front of Channel 9 and report on the Matthew Johns group sex scandal. Not sure if you remember.
Yes,
huge
I do.
story.
Yeah, I do remember that, yes.
Huge sit down, as it turned out, that he did with Tracy Grimshaw. I think she won a Walkley for that. But I was sent to the rival network to stand outside the front and do live cross for the daytime news for Channel 10. And I was so nervous because I'd not long been a reporter in Sydney, and I was, quite junior and finding my feet. And I knew the Channel 10 bosses would be watching my first live cross for the network. And I knew the Channel 9 bosses would be watching too, considering I was standing outside the front of their building. So I do remember that.
Yeah, and for you, what did you, so through all those challenges and being nervous, what have you learnt along the way about yourself to, now I will say you're a TV veteran, and What have you learned about yourself from those early days to now?
I definitely work best under pressure, and I'm someone who, the more stressful the situation, the more I sort of, I don't know if internalise is the right word, but the more I wind down. I don't see, you see people flapping and stressing out, and it just doesn't help in a stressful situation anywhere if you're panicking about, when you've got a file or deadlines or who you've spoken to or who you haven't got on camera.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always just really kind of approached it very pragmatically. What do I need to tell this story? Who do I need to speak to? How can I convince them to speak to me? And then in terms of the live television and live crosses, I feel that I've always felt very comfortable communicating live. I'm much more worried about my scripting. If you see me writing a news script at some ungodly hour of the night, I really get up in my head, is this the right way to say it? And this sentence is rubbish. I could have written it better. And where should I put this person? And I really obsess about scripting, and I still do. But with live crosses and communication, I think it's, strip it back. I'm having a conversation.
Yeah, you just have to be natural.
And I think as a viewer, and it's hard to me, obviously, for me to be an objective viewer now, but I think, you can tell if the person who's communicating to you on television is very nervous or perhaps has been rehearsing and practicing, and then I think, it's natural to stumble and have a conversation and show your expression. So I've always tried to do that.
So for you, what changes have you seen in the media industry in the 20 years that you've been involved in it?
Oh my goodness, it's a different world. It's a whole new world. I mean, obviously, you look at Channel 9 and the merger with the newspapers and radios and the sort of empire that we are now. Everyone is doing more and more, wearing more hats, playing more roles, having to diversify. And there's not necessarily any more resources or money. So it's very challenging. Obviously, social media goes without saying. For a time there, it was Twitter. Everything was Twitter. I spent my whole, as a foreign correspondent, Twitter was where all the breaking news would come through.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very reactive to that for a while there. In the Trump era, I mean, he would, as president, write 2 tweets and that would be your 2-minute news story for the night. Anything he said would be reaction to that. And it's extraordinary when you think about it. You could never have predicted a platform where a world leader could write, one 180-letter sentence, which wasn't always coherent, and you'd have other world leaders responding to it on camera, analysis. I mean, it was... and, Instagram, Facebook, now TikTok plays a big role. So we have to kind of be across all platforms, and it makes it more competitive too, in terms of tracking people down and approaching people. So it's changed a lot.
And for the work side of things, has social media made it easier or harder now? Well,
easier, as I just mentioned, to connect with people. If I'm looking for a victim or a family member or anywhere in the world, whatever's happened, social media is almost instant connection. So that's been great. But then the downside is how fast the news cycle is because of it. We're sort of constantly on a hamster wheel, I think.
Yep.
And things pop up everywhere. And also, look at international, global conflicts now become... I mean, the war in Ukraine is a good example. That was a war an invasion and a war which still is very sadly playing out, but from day one was played out on social media. You're watching these horrific videos, and it sort of changed the way we report on conflicts as well.
And in a sense, and this is just my thought, it sort of dehumanises it a little bit. With everyone can just get their phones now and just take those videos, and as I think from a young person's perspective, like seeing you actually there and reporting on what is actually happening on the ground, it's better than just getting someone taking a video and then just uploading it, and there's no content. Like you can't just, like, yeah, you can see, okay, there's a bombing happening, but you're actually explaining, and that's the difference now. There's a big difference.
Well, it's fraud. It's absolutely fraud. And we would see, I can remember being in Ukraine and would see videos pop up of a certain, and they would say this hospital has been bombed by this side or that side. And people, I think people are more clued into it now, but people take that as fact. So it is a platform where it's very, very easy for misinformation to be spread.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, it becomes extremely divisive.
Absolutely.
And toxic, really. We barely use Twitter now. And, in fact, a lot of major media companies have pulled their Twitter pages down. But, it's still, you see what's happening in Israel, and you see a lot of it on Instagram, and you see a lot of it on Facebook. And as you've said, it's not always with accompanied by fact or context.
Absolutely. And so for you, throughout the years, you've worked you've worked your way through the industry to host Today, and also become the face of Nine News in the afternoons. You've covered the bushfires, the Lint Cafe, what was that like for you, covering the Lint Cafe when that happened?
That wasn't me.
Oh, wasn't
no,
you?
No,
oh,
I did not cover Lint.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. I was on maternity leave.
Oh, okay.
So that's the big one that I missed.
Yeah, right.
In fact, I was on maternity leave and we were moving house, because I remember just having it on.
Oh, well, there you go.
And it was very strange as an observer.
It would have
it's
been.
that feeling of... and I did get a call to come in, and I literally had a baby and was moving house that day, so I couldn't. But very strange as a journalist, all your instincts are to be there or to be in the studio, and we had rolling coverage, obviously, for days.
Yep. It was sort of like when 9/11 happened. It was that moment of it just shock. Like it was just, is this real? Is this happening? And you probably remember where you were in when September 11 happened. Like I know I was getting up to watch TV and Cheese TV on there. There you go, Amelia. That's Cheese TV and was like, this is a movie, and then went, oh no, this is not a movie. And where were you on that day?
I was the same. I remember being at home, and actually my mum woke me up and said, come and have a look at this. But I think we all have those moments throughout history where we know where we were and, the TV that we saw, and I think that's changing now. So, you have a generation who major news events, whether it be the Queen dying or Putin invading Ukraine, they are literally seeing it straight away on their phone in whichever format they choose.
Mm-hmm. So for you, working up, like obviously throughout the industry, you worked your way up to host Today, and was that always something that you wanted to aspire to, or?
Well, I've filled in, certainly, hosting the Today Show, which is great fun. But no, my end game, if you call it that, my goal was always to work on 60 Minutes.
So for you, you talked about being a foreign correspondent, and you were the Europe correspondent throughout the centenary period of Anzac Day, and what was that like for you being in? Because I know you have a real love for history.
I do.
And what was that like, walking those battlefields in the footsteps of the more than 60,000 Australians that made the ultimate sacrifice?
Yeah, it was incredible. I think one of the highlights of that stint, which is the Europe and Middle East Bureau, was the fact that I did start in 2018, which, as you said, is the centenary year. So towards the end of that year, I was really lucky to be in Amiens and covering all of the different commemorations. And as you said, walking in the trenches and filming with descendants really was really special, hearing from them about their ancestors they'd lost in battle and the impact on their families still to this day, and very, very moving. But my father instilled a firm fascination, if you like, with war history when I was young, and he did take me to the Western Front when I was about 11 or 12. We were living in France for a short time. So I always had a fascination and deep respect for it. So it was really quite an honour to go back at that time. And then again in April 2019 to Gallipoli.
Yes. And what for you, and I've been there, I've been lucky enough to go there as well, and that battlefield speaks to you, doesn't it? There's you can feel as you're there that it's just it's like the soldiers are still they're still there with you as you walk that ground. Every inch of ground you know you're following in the footsteps of Anzacs that fought and died there. And and what struck me the most was how small it was. How it's such a small space.
Oh, it is. And to think of, to think of what happened there, on that very small space. And I agree with you. I think it's quite eerie. And I think what's remarkable about Gallipoli is even now they're finding, uncovering new trenches, new evidence, new weapons.
Yeah, well, you found it. You walked through a whole new trench system.
Yeah, which was just extraordinary.
I'm so jealous of that you got to do that. So.
I was very lucky to go to Gallipoli and work with Matt McLaughlin, who's a fantastic war historian.
Good friend of mine.
Of course, yes. And you've read his books, and for any of your listeners, if they haven't, I highly recommend them. But Matt as well, and his passion for... He's just incredible.
Yep.
He can delve into any battle of any day throughout the war. So I really had, the insights of his historical mind, plus, the atmosphere of where we were standing.
Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary privilege to report from Gallipoli, and something I'd always wanted to do.
Absolutely. And you've ticked... And then... so you've been also to the Western Front, and did you go to EPA? You went to EPA and the Manning Gate, and how special is that? When they do the last post service every night, and what was that like being there for that?
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was very, very moving. I'd been before, as I said, when I was younger, and I think for me, maybe Villa Bretonneux was really the one that has stayed with me the most.
Yep.
I think that Australian connection, and again, I'd spent some time there when I was younger, and it was an eerie day, that commemoration. It was freezing, and there was sideways rain, and as the last post rang out, the weather just stopped. The rain stopped, and the wind stopped, and it was just a real moment of peace.
There's something about that. I know as you climb to the top of the tower and you look out where the cemetery is, and then you turn and look to the town of Villers-Bretonneux, and then you just... It's beautiful.
It is, and they've done an extraordinary job with that war memorial. I know it's been controversial, the amount of money they put into it, but it is phenomenal if anyone's considering a visit and to walk through there, and the way they've done the audio-visual historical display. It's really something.
Oh, it is. And I think for what I got, and I'd say it to anyone, Amelia, is that when you walk that ground, you're doing a pilgrimage for people who can't get over there, and you're fortunate. And it just, I think you can read it in books, but it's when you walk through those cemeteries, it's the scale. You're walking through tens of thousands of headstones, and you're just looking, going, wow, what was it all for? And it gives you a real appreciation of just how blessed we are that we are living in a beautiful country. And yes, we've had wars since, but I think it's just something that it just makes you appreciate of.
Well, indeed, yeah, and also it makes you think about how we continue to need to work together in different countries and alliances to fight for democracy. You see what's happening in the world at the moment.
Oh, yeah. It's testing times at the moment, and it's unrest, a lot of unrest. And whilst you were over in Europe as the correspondent, you covered the 75th D-Day landings. What was that like? Was that another... You're ticking these amazing things off the list.
That was incredible to be at Normandy. What was interesting about that was it was sort of twofold, because you had this remarkable kind of occasion and anniversary, and there were, living veterans there, present 94-year-olds, and you see, where they landed on the beach, and all this is going through your mind, and again, the cemeteries, and there's a lot of emotion. However, there was also Donald Trump, who'd been, and I'd been with him, I think, for about maybe a week already leading up to, and when you're on a sort of Trump trip as a correspondent, you just do not stop. It is bombshell after bombshell, and there's, for your listeners, working on an Australian time zone from the other side of the world is very difficult logistically. So today's show is at night, and then the 6 p.m. news is in the morning. So you're really topsy-turvy, which basically you don't sleep. You're doing live crosses until midnight, then you're writing a script, then you're up for the afternoon news. So it's a pretty wild ride. And Donald Trump was doing his usual thing, making a lot of news along the way. So by the time we got to Normandy, there was this, I don't want to say it was overshadowed because it was an extraordinary historical moment, and I definitely felt that. But there were also a lot of politics at play. Macron made a very, very, the Prime Minister at the time, moving, but quite political speech. Donald Trump, had been very outspoken about his distrust of NATO, which he, thought was or thinks, I assume, is obsolete. So there was some politics at play as well as this incredible commemoration.
And for you, like you'd been at Gallipoli, but then you'd been at D-Day, and totally two different beaches.
Yeah.
Like you look at how sheltered Gallipoli was to how open Normandy is.
Just extraordinary.
And the different tides and how the water comes in and then goes back out. And,
I know, you can't imagine it.
Oh, no, and I think I was lucky enough last year in September. I did always wanted to do the D-Day landings, and we went when the tide was up, and I'm like, hang on, where's the sand? And then they said, no, it comes, like, it'll go out, like the water will go out such a long way, and then they're like, you've got to come back tonight. And then when we came back at the night time, it was like you look at where the water was, and then you look up to the beach and just open, like how any of those men got through.
Just open slaughter.
Absolutely, absolutely, and just
unbelievable.
Just
they were sent to the slaughter.
Absolutely,
they really were.
And it's just so sad, and it just makes you appreciate, the sacrifice made for us, and whilst you're over there as well, you covered Ash Barty and the French Open, and what was that like?
Well, funny you should say that because literally the night, I think it was that evening, we were doing live crosses very late into night for today's show about, D-Day and Trump, and the newsroom rang me and said, this Queensland players got them through to the quarterfinals of Roland Garros. Maybe you should we think about heading to Paris? And here am I at the end of like a 9-day Trump tour. I haven't slept. I'm like, really, and D-Day and all the veterans are quite emotional. I was so drained. I'm like, I've never heard of this Ashley Barty. She's relatively unknown. She's not going to win the French Open. Like, come on. Anyway, we got a couple of hours sleep and we hit the road to head back for London, and, sure enough, she got through. So we turned around and we drove to Paris, and it was just extraordinary. Then the semi, and then there we were outside Roland Garros. And she's just an incredible, she's very, as you know, very down to earth, very humble. She came out. We weren't the rights holders. It's tricky when you're not the rights holders to those major sporting events because you literally can't get inside with the camera. She came out and chatted to us all, and how's your tennis history? Are you pretty good with your tennis history? You know what? I'm not. And I had never reported on. This is what happens as a foreign correspondent. 1 minute you're with Donald Trump, next minute you're at the French Open. And I had never reported on. You have to become an expert very quickly on tennis. Obviously I had some help from the sports department with scripting the key bits of the game. But really, it wasn't about the tennis. It was about her and her story and, her childhood and the cricket and then the switch to tennis and just her incredible drive. So I distinctly remember being out the front of we had the Eiffel Tower as the backdrop, I think probably 48 hours later, still having not slept. And I got a call saying, Sports Sunday want you, for a segment, probably about 7 to 10 minutes. I'm thinking, all right, you want to hear me talk about tennis for 7 to 10 minutes? This will be great. But again, it was just all about Ash Barty and this incredible history-making win for an Australian at Roland Garros. So it was another incredible event to be there for. I
tell you, you picked a really good time to go and be a foreign correspondent, because we'll get into the next part of when you were foreign correspondent in America in a minute. But for you, has there ever been times where you've been being a correspondent, has there been some close calls and near-death experiences?
Look, it's hard to say. I mean, I think you just sort of, I've been in war zones, so I guess you can you're obviously in danger. And some of the riots in America were quite scary in terms of, the violence and then the reaction from authorities as well. So I've definitely been in some hairy situations.
It's not that, and I wanted to throw that in because it's just something, as you would say to me, it's just part of the, it's a calculated risk. You're there to, it's your job. You've got to do. But when you stop and actually think, maybe there has, been a couple of close calls. And for you then, so like many journalists have. The Ballabo Five, they lost their lives in 1975, and it's a danger. What you do is it is dangerous. Like when you're in a war zone, you are reporting live. Like things are happening as you're doing live crosses, and I think people forget that, and that part of that you do take risks as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's part of the job. If you're going to go and cover, conflicts or riots and rallies or whatever it may be, you sort of that anything could happen at any time.
Absolutely.
So it's never kind of front of mind, but at the same time you're always conscious of safety, obviously.
Absolutely. And so you had your stint as European correspondent, and then you were on your way back to Australia, and then you got offered the US correspondence role. How did that come about, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, so we were finishing up in London, and we thought we might be heading home, but things change quickly in this industry. Yes. So off we went to LA, and I actually remember saying, oh, great, I'd been to Iraq twice. We'd had Brexit going on. It had been a really heavy time in Europe. And I remember saying to my boss, oh, great, LA time zone, sunshine, margaritas, some red carpet gigs. It'll be a breeze compared to this job. And he sort of laughed. And then, of course, we landed, and within weeks, COVID hit. Trump kind of shut down the country, and I was off to Washington, D.C. on a roller coaster that I could not have foreseen.
And because it sort of hit Australia a little bit later, but you sort of hit like ground zero, and it was like, what was that like? And was it like, because there was so much, at first people were getting, you've got a young family, and what was that like, reporting on it? How hard was that for you?
I had a very strange experience of COVID, I've realised, and it took me a while to realise that, because in America, it was so extreme and the numbers were so high, and I spent a lot of time in New York during the peak of COVID, and standing outside morgue trucks and all those things were kind of normal in America, but it was also, we didn't have the lockdowns like you had here, so I travelled more than ever. We were on and off planes constantly. They didn't shut borders. I mean, yes, they shut restaurants, but also you've got to remember America has 50 different states which behave like different countries. So, in one state, I'd get screamed at if I went for a run without a mask on and abused. And then I'd jump on a plane to another state, and I remember walking into a gas station in, I think it was Kansas, and this woman saying to me, "You get that off your face, girl. We don't wear those here." It was like this red state that they, basically didn't believe that COVID was transmissible. So it was a very strange experience. And meantime, one of my children was at school, and our school in LA was shut for 18 months. So I know people here talk about like 5 weeks, 6 weeks of no school. 18 months the LA Unified School District shut. I think it was 15 actually. So my son, who's nearly 10 now, learnt to read and write on Zoom. So every day he sat at the kitchen table and he was on a Zoom screen with his teacher and 25 other students. School hours, and my husband, to his credit, homeschooled him and helped him learn how to read and write in a very, very strange situation. Meantime, my daughter, who was not even school age, she was a toddler, she must have been 3, went to a preschool every single day because it was a private preschool, so it was open.
Yeah, right.
And my son would say, "Why is she allowed to go and be with all her friends all day and I have to sit at the kitchen table by myself?" And I would say, "That's a good question. There is no common sense to this in this country, and there is no common sense to this virus, and no one knows what anyone's doing." So it was quite chaotic in America. Everywhere you went, it was a different response. And I was kind of, I mean, as media, we kind of were just working harder and travelling more than ever. And again, I spent a lot of that time, obviously, at Donald Trump's election rallies because it was in 2020, especially in the later half of the year. And, you know, no one would wear masks. And we would get, I remember being spat at and my cameraman was attacked, like hit for, you know, take your mask off, you're fake news. So it was a very, very strange time to be a reporter.
And for you being over there and obviously following Trump, and did you, because their political system's very different to ours, and did you have to, like, were you looking up what their system was compared to ours, or what?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, when I moved to London, I studied every day to understand Brexit and
because it was
the Westminster system.
Too, wasn't there?
Absolutely. And then similarly when I moved to America, I mean, obviously as a journalist I have a deep interest in global politics anyway, and I'd been, before I moved to America, funnily enough, as Europe correspondent, I think I'd done like 5 Trump tours. So I was very already sort of involved in what was happening in US politics because he kept coming to London and then he, you know...
You were probably getting overseeing him going, oh, can I come to something else?
So I was, you know, deeply invested and interested already, but obviously it's different when you're there and you're following, you know, Congress and the way that works, which is not always relevant actually to Australian viewers, but, you know, you have to be...
across it.
Following it and across it to understand what's happening on a state level, which is very important then to what's happening on a national level. So it was fascinating for me.
Yeah, and it would have been, like, fascinating to be part of that Biden-Trump, you know, that election, the run-up to their election and how that was playing out. And yeah, like, as I say, you've covered some amazing things in it was a really great time to be away for you, like, from Australia.
Yeah, it turned out to be a pretty wild time to be a foreign correspondent. And I think the 5 weeks I went for 5 weeks on the election campaign. I mean, we travelled a lot. We'd always come back to home base in LA in between. But that 5-week campaign leading up to the November 3rd election in 2020 was, I think, the most extraordinary thing I've ever done in my career.
Absolutely. And for you, Amelia, you mentioned you've got 2 beautiful kids. And how do you balance being a mum and working? Like, how does, with the crazy hours that you do, and I know, like, you do some absolutely monster hours, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, how does anyone balance it? You know, just like all working mums, I guess. I have a lot of before and after school care. And, you know, I have a wonderful co-parent and we sort of shuffle the kids around depending on our schedules and our trips. And my mum as well. So good to be back in Sydney with the grandparents to help support. My dad's flown down from Queensland and my stepmum a few times to help out. So I am lucky with family support. But like you know, like everyone, I think you get into the working year and everyone's kind of in survival mode. We're at the end of the year now and everyone I'm seeing at the school gate is just wrecked. Like, everyone's done.
Everyone's
the kids
ready,
are exhausted. The parents are exhausted. There's more things than ever on at this time of year. Every dance concert and Christmas concert. And so I'm
Catch up
just
with
like,
friends and family. And,
I think we're all ready for a break. But, yeah, I mean, it's tricky. But in a way, this is the only job that you know, my daughter, for example, was 1 when we moved to London. So she has only ever known me as a working, travelling mum.
Yep.
So it's not unusual for her. And I know other mums sometimes say, oh, I've never left the kids for this long and I'm worried about, which is totally normal in their family. But for me, for my daughter not to see me for 1 week in person, we're always calling and she's on Messenger Kids now. So she calls me on Messenger Kids. That's not a big deal for them. That's their normal. So it's just how it is in your family and in your life, right?
It's just a balancing.
Yeah, and I really, when I do have the kids with me, I really prioritise them and their activities and that quality time. And yeah, we have a lot of fun together.
Absolutely, and I think it's because it's that forever, like, it's that forever question of for mums with the balancing act. How do you be a mum and also pursue your career and have a career? And that's the thing, and you're doing both, and you're doing it You're doing it really well.
Not always successfully, let me tell you.
Well,
might look that way from the outside.
Yeah, it does. It looks from the outside. It looks, but I think
the wheels fall off often. But I think that's normal.
But I think that's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that's how life is, and it's. I think it's not just for mums. It's for dads as well. Like I know that if how do you balance it? Like
everyone's under so much pressure.
Absolutely.
And you want your kids to excel and to get the best opportunities and do what they want to do, but you've got to get your job done. And I know for myself, Wednesday nights, for example, I'm always sitting in a car at a soccer or baseball field. Usually my daughter's next to me doing her homework, and I'm on the laptop, working on a script or on research or interview prep.
Yep.
You just make it work. And, that's all. We always end up getting Macca's for dinner in the car on the way home. I'm like, sorry, guys. This is how we're going to get through Wednesday.
You just got to do what you got to do. And so you mentioned, you came back. So after 4 years, you moved back to Australia. And what was it like to come home after being away for so long?
Lovely. I was a bit apprehensive because I really loved the bureau life and I loved the team that I was with in LA, and I loved the job. But, the opportunity to work at 60 Minutes came up. And as I said to you, it's something that I've sort of flagged with my family since I was a little girl. So the timing was perfect in that sense. And I'm really enjoying being back at home. I love being near my parents, and they get to spend time with their grandchildren, which is great.
Yep.
And the team here is fantastic. It's been a whirlwind first year at 60 Minutes. I've worked harder than I could ever have imagined, but I've also done some things that I didn't think I'd get the opportunity to do in my first 12 months.
Absolutely. You've covered the USS North Carolina. You've covered the Yes campaign. There's so much that you have covered in that short space of time, and because for people who aren't aware, the 60, what's the background of 60 Minutes? Like, what is it? It's a current affairs program, but what, and do you, because there's some really uplifting stories, there's some really sad stories, there's current affairs. So when you join the team, is there, are you given, right, this is some of the things that we will be covering, or does it just develop as you're doing the role?
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, obviously it's Australia's leading and longest running current affairs show, and 60 Minutes tells the stories that no one else can, and in a way that, no one else does. And we'll go to the places that we need to go to. And we'll, for example, after Putin invaded Ukraine, and I was in Ukraine as a correspondent, as were a lot of the world's media. But, 60 Minutes went and interviewed President Zelensky, So... But to your point, or to your question, it is a mix. I came to the show with a few ideas of things that I wanted to do. And obviously my sort of background and interest, having been in America, was to do with national security and foreign policy and those sorts of things. And one of the highlights for me this year has been sitting down with the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Yes. Which was like a super pinch me moment as a journalist when he came to Australia. And again, he didn't do any other media, he came to 60 Minutes. So, you mentioned the USS North Carolina, the Virginia-class submarine. That's something that I've been working on since AUKUS was first announced in September 2021. Yep. And that, went all the way to the top of the Pentagon for us to get access to that submarine. Yeah, wow. So that was an extraordinary experience. Sitting down with the Prime Minister to talk the voice referendum and other things. So there's a range of things that ideas that we come up with, producers as well. There's things that we follow in the news, and there's people that come to us, with story ideas.
Yeah, it is an amazing show, and it's like, as you say, it's what I've grown up with it as well. I've known 60 Minutes. That was what you did. You watched 60 Minutes Sunday night, 8:30 religiously. That was, and it's now moved forward, or is it still at 8:30? Look,
the landscape is changing, and so many of our viewers now. We have an incredible more than 5 million YouTube subscribers.
Wow.
And I'm constantly stunned by. A few months ago, I was shooting a story on an aircraft carrier, a US aircraft carrier in the South China Sea.
Yeah,
And I landed in an Osprey, and one of the first Marines that came up to me said, "Oh, you're from 60 Minutes Australia. We love that show. We all watch you on YouTube." And I was like, seriously? So it has a real international following on YouTube.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I think this is the great challenge for broadcast television at the moment is getting viewers in a certain time slot when people can stream whatever they want, whenever they want. But we are still on every Sunday night. Might not always be like clockwork. Might be 7, might be 8:30.
Yeah.
It's usually about 8:30.
Yeah.
But, hopefully that's still a trusted time slot and a place that people can come and know that they're getting, fair and accurate reporting and also access to stories and people that other people don't get.
Absolutely. And for you, Amelia, you've been almost 21 years now in almost 21. So I'm not bringing age into it for you. I'm not. Is there one story or one bulletin that you look back on that you're most proud of in that time?
Oh, that's such a hard question, Adam.
Sorry.
No, there's not. I couldn't say, there's things that pop into my mind that, I mentioned earlier when I was a very young journalist on the Gold Coast for Channel 10. There was a 16-year-old boy who was taken by a shark, and we were the first crew to arrive at his family's home, and they actually had just learnt from the police that he had died, and they invited us in, and we sat and had tea and did an interview with them. That's always stayed with me because it was my first sort of, we call them death knocks in the business. It was my first really big and kind of exclusive, if you like, death knock, which is a horrible term, but why it stayed with me is because it just brought home to me how bizarre it is, but also how much of a privilege it is that we turn up at people's homes when they have just, at the absolute worst moment in their lives. And so often, and I'm still surprised by it 20 years later, people will open their door and say, "Yes, I want to tell you about my son who was just taken by a shark or hit by a car or died on the front line." And that is just such an incredible privilege that most people don't have access to. You can't just walk up to, you can't just walk up to someone's grieving parents or someone who's just been in a battle zone or, someone who's running for president. You don't have a front row seat to that. That is our job.
Yeah.
And that's a huge responsibility.
Well, you're history making in some cases of people know your face of you broke that story or you know what I mean. Like it's something that, and I know what you're saying, and I didn't mean to cut you off, was that I'm privileged to do what I do as well. And I get it, I understand it. Recently a veteran friend of mine passed away tragically, and I was able to capture his life and recorded his memoirs before he passed away, and it was. To me, that's I've nearly done 100 episodes now, and you're the 99th episode recorded. And out of all the episodes, now his is actually the most significant for me because...
And for his family, that's so special.
Exactly. And
what a remarkable gift for them.
Well, his mum actually reached out to me and said, "Adam, thank you for recording my son's life." And she said, whenever I'm down, I can put the headphones in and listen to his voice. And to me, if that doesn't make you, if that doesn't light you up or give you purpose and fulfillment, nothing will. And like you say, it's a really, what we do is, and I'm not a journalist, but it's a privilege.
Well, it goes back to what we spoke about earlier about, basic sort of human instincts as well, that people so often do want to share. And I've always been surprised, and I'll continue to be surprised by, grieving parents or brothers or sisters or wives who will say, "Yes, I want to tell you about him, and, please make sure you say that he was this or he did that." And that is a real responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think the way, as you say, compassion, show compassion, be kind, and just tell their story, and that's what it's all about. And I think it's, for you, I look now of how has technology changed from when you first started, from back in the day, and how has it changed?
Yeah, so much. I mean, we were tape-to-tape editing, so you know,
right.
You'd go out shooting and then you'd get the tape from the camera operator and you'd sit there and you'd shuffle your tapes back and forward and pick your grabs, you know, and that way. And then, it's been, and then we went to disc and now we're all on hard drive, and it's just extraordinary. I mean, I can open my laptop anywhere in the world and, access the vision that we've just been filming and start writing. I don't have to wait to go back to the office or wherever it is. And
so it's sort of it's evolved, and
it's evolved
cameras
so
evolved
much.
and everything who knows with AI now, who knows where we'll be in another 20 years. Who knows?
It's a scary thought.
It is. And for you, Amelia, what are your plans going forward with your family and career?
Well, I plan to have a good break over Christmas and the summer, Adam. So I'm looking forward to that. But I'll be hitting the ground running in January, off to America for 60 Minutes. And we've got some cracking stories that we're filming over there. And we're racing around, I think, about 5 or 6 states in a few weeks to shoot several different stories. Next year's a huge year. I mean, obviously, you've got the 2024 US election. Donald Trump's on trial. So that's interesting. And we never know, do we? We never know what will happen in the world. I mean, look at what's happening in Israel and
Ukraine and
so it's going to be a big year, and then just focusing on, getting my kids to do their homework and eat their vegetables as usual.
So what advice would you give to any young person that is looking to have a career in media and knowing with what you've been through, and what advice would you give to them?
I would say consume everything. I always had this kind of fascination with news and current affairs. Read, get all your papers online, or however you get your news. Maybe not just off TikTok, which is also a concerning trend. Listen to radio, and then I've always been a big believer, I'm a big believer in education, but also practical experience. So whether it is trying to get into a radio newsroom or going somewhere regional or writing for a masthead or internships. I did so many internships. I think I did Sky News and 7. I worked overnights for a while, and just immerse yourself in what it is that you're passionate about. And for me, that was news media.
And you had a dream, and you've got there, and it's and you've had an amazing experience getting to 60 Minutes. It's a dream come true for you. You've sort of, that was the goal, and you've got there. And for you now, knowing what you know now, Amelia, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
Oh, that's a tricky one. She definitely wouldn't listen to whatever I said to her. So that would be a waste of time. I don't really believe in regrets. Like, I try to, obviously, we all have things that we might have done differently, or, perhaps opportunities that didn't come up, or that we went in a different direction. But I think I would stay the course that I have. It hasn't been easy. I've moved around a lot. There's sacrifices in any job and any lifestyle. But at the end of the day, I just hope that I can keep doing good journalism, and also show my kids that it's good to have a good work ethic and do something that you're passionate about. And
absolutely, and for you, I think that's great advice to yourself. And so for you career-wise now, after 60 Minutes, what's for you? Where do you see yourself?
Oh, honestly, I don't want to project. I feel like I've just had the biggest whirlwind. The first year at 60 Minutes, they all say, is always the hardest.
Yep.
And I feel like I'm just finding my feet. I've still got so much to learn, and I'm so grateful to be in this fantastic team, fantastic EP, lots of support, and I've got Tara Brown sitting next to me. Not that we're ever in the office at the same time, but I've had some extraordinary mentors along the way. So I think going forward, I think that 2024 for me is really just consolidate with what I've learned in this first year at 60 Minutes, settle in and get some more great stories out there.
Awesome. That's awesome. And for you, you mentioned, it's been challenging, but is there one moment in your career that has been the biggest challenge, and what did you learn from that challenge about yourself that you didn't already know?
I've been in so many ridiculous situations in this job. Like you find yourself, jumping crime scene tape, or I remember this police blockade in Brussels in the middle of the night, and you just think, what are we doing here? How are we going to get around this? How are we going to get to air? I do think if I had to say the most challenging story or moment was probably the George Floyd civil unrest after his death in 2020, which then obviously kind of bled into the election campaign. But those riots, I was in Washington, D.C., were just extremely violent, and there was so much... It's hard to articulate, Adam, because, I spent all day marching and talking to people who had so much love, and they were there were families with kids, and there was empathy, and they really wanted to talk about this issue of race and, how it had been gotten out of hand in America. And it's a very difficult topic to report on anyway, especially as a blonde, white woman from Australia.
Yep.
And there I am in the middle of this riot in Washington, D.C., surrounded by, often surrounded by African Americans sort of screaming at me. But I think the greatest challenge was we were in rolling coverage. So we were constantly on air, and people were coming up to me as I was talking live to, Carl or whoever, and interrupting me and saying, you're not listening, this is what you need to know about this situation. And to interview those people live on air and kind of try and calm the rhetoric and the swearing. And it was like they were just it was a minefield,
Yep.
And obviously throughout the day, as it got later and it got darker, it got, more dangerous. That was a real period of growth for me, I think, as a journalist, just in managing my own safety, being aware of my surrounding, fantastic camera operator, we had security. But it was, we were under tear gas and rubber bullets, and it was pretty wild.
Absolutely.
And I think after I had done, luckily, I shouldn't say luckily, but the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest riots in Paris, which had been the December of 2018 or 19, I can't remember now. But that really prepared. Had I not been in the middle of those yellow vest riots, I don't think I would have managed so well in America, because that really I had that experience of how to sort of manage and also get the information I needed to get, and with all the pressures of, live coverage and filing scripts and whatever at the same time. So that was hugely challenging. And then, through the rest of 2020, we were sort of in and out of quite volatile situations, obviously culminating in the insurrection on the steps of the Capitol. So it was a crazy time in US politics, and I can only hope that, we don't see any more of that in the coming 12 months.
Absolutely. No, as I say, you've faced some things, and it's, and for you, you mentioned, you're working alongside a beautiful team of Tara and Liz Hayes, and you've got your 60 Minutes family. Who have been some of your greatest mentors that have helped you along through your career?
Oh, I've been so lucky. I really have. When I was in high school, John Gatfield, who was a Sky News presenter at the time, very well-known journalist, had his daughters at the same school as I was at, so he came to give a speech on Careers Evening, and I went up to him and I said, I've always wanted to be on 60 Minutes. And he really mentored me all the way through.
Okay.
And then, Peter Overton, who I'm lucky to call a friend, but he's been an incredible mentor for me. And then just like these amazing women, Georgie Gardner and Jessica Rowe, actually, really was a huge support to me after I think I had my first baby and I was off on maternity leave, and having that freak out that we all have about going back to work and, you know, rosters and where's my career going to go now, and you know, and now Tara, who's so generous with her time and such a legend of the industry. So I have been very lucky.
Absolutely. Well, I always have this thing, Amelia, when you surround yourself with amazing people, amazing things happen, and also too, you got to work, and it's hard work, and you have proven that it's hard work. It's not easy. It's certainly not easy being a correspondent. It's not easy, you know, being a mum. But as you say, hard work, dedication, staying true to your goals, and it's just absolutely, you're a testament of that. You really are, and you've helped me out. I sent you I met you a few years ago and sent you my book, and you did a lovely testimonial for me. And thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. You really just are a person that gives, and thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. You've written a beautiful book. You should be very proud of it. I'm excited for the launch.
Yes, thank you.
And I should say as well, this isn't just about me because it's your birthday today. So a huge happy birthday to Adam today.
Thank you.
And how about having to work on your birthday? I'm sorry this was my only available day.
You've got to do it. You got to do these things. You got to make time and sacrifices.
Yeah.
And it's
so your listeners won't know this, but we have got a little birthday, a little chocolate cake.
We do. Yes, we do. So no, thank you. And when you call time on your media career, what do you want your legacy to be, Amelia? And how do you want to be remembered?
Wow. I would just hope at that point that that I've contributed some stories that have, you know, resulted in change, and that, you know, I've told some incredible stories that have stayed with people, or done some interviews that were powerful, or that, you know, resulted in interesting stories. And yeah, I hope that gosh, it's almost morbid to think like this. It's a long way off. I'm not calling time anytime soon. I think I've got a lot more to do.
Oh, you do. Yeah, it's always something that I like to bring in of, you know, what do you, like, you know, see yourself in the future, and I think what shines through to me is that you are someone who is always, you do your homework, you are prepared. You
have to be.
Yeah, you script writing, like you have to be. And I've learnt that too throughout the podcast. I've nearly done 100 episodes, and I look back now and go, oh my God, like I listened to the first one and cringed, like it's, you know, but it's preparation.
Well, we're all learning every day, aren't we, Adam?
Exactly right. Well, there's a quote, Amelia, I want to finish with this. I really believe this sums you up. So Amelia, you have been gracing our screens for many years with always a smile and a positive attitude. Thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations and giving us a rare insight into a rare that we see but don't really hear much about. And I am grateful now to call you a friend, and what you've done for me, I can't thank you enough. And the quote is, what you get by achieving your goal is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals. The simple act of listening to someone and making them feel as if they have truly been heard is a most treasured gift. Amelia, you always put others first, and you are a gift and a treasure to this earth. So I believe this quote sums you up, and it has been an honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations and share your story. So Amelia Adams, thank you so much for coming on True Blue Conversations.
Oh, Adam, that is so kind. That is just lovely. Thank you. And I can't wait for people to read your book.
Thank you.
And get a little bit more of an insight into your story as well, which is truly remarkable.
Thank you.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TrueBlue for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.